Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Tom Collihew, if you don't already know by being on my channel. This is a live video, my usual live Sunday stream, in which is sort of becoming the easy listening, more chilled out one, even though I do tend to still get a lovely ton of questions. So I'll be answering a lot of typical wrestling questions. I have a few topics of conversation ready, which I'll jump in with very shortly, because I do want to cover some of the big wrestling stories that I maybe haven't got to cover on the Sportskeeda post shows, on my Smackdown preview show on Fridays, and in fact on Backstage Heat last night on our Twitch show. So if you will just bear with me while I let everyone on Twitter know that I am here, so anyone can jump in if they want to. The first topic of conversation I'm going to have is going to be about Sasha Banks' return, which is due apparently this week on Smackdown, as in this week coming up. That to me is exciting. That to me says that they have plans in place and they are almost ready to go already with everything going on with Sasha. Because obviously the big story right now is Sasha Banks versus Bayley. Now, it could be that they were intending to have Sasha Banks off TV for a while longer, but then they've moved Mandy Rose from SmackDown to Raw, and that's something I really want to be talking about as well, because that comes pretty out of the blue. I'm not aware that The Miz had that sort of power. Manny Santos already exactly on topic says, when do you think Mandy makes her Raw debut? I think she'll probably debut this Monday. In fact, I think we'll see her tomorrow debuting in some capacity. I think she would make a good fit to challenge Asuka at some point soon, though I do think Mickie James, as we know, will be challenging this week on Raw. I'm pretty sure Natalya will be the challenger at Clash of Champions. And then for me, Mandy Rose would come afterwards, challenger for Hell in a Cell, leading into the draft, which is apparently due in October. To my knowledge, draft plans have not been formally firmed up as of yet, which is probably a good thing. A large part of this is down to the fact that the Amway Center's contract with WWE does expire at the end of October, and at that point they can then have a discussion as to what to do next. So the intention is that they will be able to open it to fans as soon as possible, that being 10%, 20%, and so on and so forth, but they will need to renegotiate to do that. It looks like Orlando Magic, who do perform in the same arena, are not going to be able to go back as intended at the end of October, which is why the contract only lasts as long as it does. It may take a little while longer. Jagged says, hi, Tom. Hope you're good today. I'm doing a bit better than I was on Friday. Tell you that, I'm not shaking as much going into the stream. But yeah, it's some good news on the home front. My stepdad's doing a fair bit better, so I'm feeling good about that primarily, and a few other things. Jagged also says, I still think Mandy going for Raw is for storyline purposes. I don't know if you agree with me on that. I do agree with you on that. I don't think this is a huge non-kayfabe change. I think it's very much a case that they have put her there for a storyline, for the advancement of a storyline, potentially to give Asuka a new challenger. And I don't think it will be long before Mandy and Otis are reunited, because if there is a draft coming, we could very quickly see Heavy Machinery moved over. That to me makes more sense, because Otis is not taking the championship away from Roman Reigns. I really have never seen that happening. I didn't think he was taking it from Braun or from The Fiend either. Whereas Drew McIntyre, a bit more likely. Randy Orton, if he wins it, a bit more likely. It's a way to get it off Drew, first and foremost. And really, when it comes to that, I think Raw needs tag teams a lot more than SmackDown does at the minute. SmackDown has quite a few. Ellie Lynn says, do you think with Mandy moving to Raw, that could potentially mean Otis trading the briefcase to Miz or Morrison for Mandy? I hope it doesn't work like that, because that kind of means that women are a commodity that can be traded for. So I hope that's not where they're going. I wouldn't like to see it. But with Mandy moving, it does open up that as a possibility. Rather it didn't happen. I'd rather Otis and Tucker moved in the draft and took the briefcase and the contract with them. And I think if Miz or Morrison does take the contract at some point, they're not going to do much of it either, because I can't see them beating Roman either. Potentially the feud, but definitely couldn't see it. But the story essentially going into this is that does leave the route completely free and clear. Mandy Rose had said in interviews that she wants to be challenging for the SmackDown Women's Championship after SummerSlam and the victory over Sonya Deville. That is very much what I expected. I knew ahead of time that that's how the match was going down, but there wasn't any sort of big push after that. She didn't go immediately into the championship scene, and now moving to Raw, she could still move into the championship scene, but it's a different championship. This does leave the entire route clear for Sasha versus Bayley at Hell in a Cell now. That seemed like the logical progression. There was supposed to be a big women's match, but there was concerns that they didn't have the right women's match going into Hell in a Cell, because ultimately there wasn't much heat behind any real feud. Everything on Raw was temporary, especially with Sasha Banks and Bayley no longer on Raw, and they had been the core of the feud with Asuka for such a long time. And everyone on SmackDown has already been beaten by Bayley. This changes that. This really changes that. So Sasha versus Bayley for me is very much going to be what happens inside a Cell. I am confident Bayley will retain over Nikki Cross. I think that's a placeholder as much as anything. Unfortunate for Nikki. But with Sasha Banks coming back now, I expect a big promo, a big challenge, and for Nikki Cross to be overlooked. Could also be good potentially as a triple threat at Clash of Champions before then getting the one-on-one match at Hell in a Cell. Noob asks, do you think Mandy Rose will face Asuka for a storyline? Absolutely, I do. I think while she's there, she's definitely able to do that. And I think she'll be a very credible challenger. There is a lack at the moment on Raw of female faces. While we don't know what's happening with Peyton Royce, there are quite a few people locked up in tag divisions. Liv Morgan would have been quite high up on the face tier, as it were, probably second only to Asuka, but now Mandy Rose immediately fills that spot. And even though it's face versus face, that makes big sense to me. Jagged says, me being huge on Otis, they slowed down his character progression while Tucker was out. Otis was out himself. Otis, Mandy, and Sonya Deville all took some time away and just weren't on TV. But whatever the plan was originally for Otis, it looks like it definitely won't be coming to a Universal Championship run. It may also be that he will hold the briefcase and we will see the Universal and WWE Championships changing hands, changing brands, not changing hands. But it's hard to tell at this point. Thank you to everyone who's joined so far. Please do remember to click like on the video. This does help me grow, gets more people in here. And even on a very temporary level, I did test this during Smack Talk on Friday night, immediately after SmackDown. And I asked for a bit more engagement. People really gave it hard. And we almost doubled the amount of people in the room. So it does definitely work. Jermaine Presley says, hi, Tom. I think Sasha versus Bayley match will happen at Hell in a Cell. Do you think WWE do title change at Hell in a Cell between Sasha and Bayley? I believe Sasha Banks will be winning there. However, Hell in a Cell will be right before or right after the draft. And this is one of the reasons that The Fiend did not beat Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell last year, because the decision just before that match had been made to move The Fiend to SmackDown. So we couldn't have the Raw title, and we ended up seeing a massive change in order to accommodate that because of a last-minute decision. When it comes to drafts, when it comes to shakeups, there is always last-minute changes and decisions and people swapping over, always. It's always quite last-minute that things are actually finalized. So it really depends who's going where and when. If Sasha Banks has been told she's going back to Raw, she ain't winning the SmackDown Women's Championship. That's all I'll say in that regard. But she would at least have Mandy Rose waiting for her on the other side. I don't have any more questions at the moment. So let's talk about the next piece of news I want to talk about, which is Miro arriving in AEW. He teased it at the All Out pay-per-view by saying there wouldn't be a Twitch stream on that night. There were a lot of rumors that he was going to be appearing in the Battle Royal there, but he did not. He instead appeared this week on Dynamite. Pardon me, I'm just stopping a phone call. He instead appeared this week on Dynamite and made a very big impact. There was some talk about who was scripting certain lines for him. Chris Jericho apparently did script a line about the brass ring. Other than that, I think Miro will be very comfortable, very confident, and a great addition to AEW. The fact that he can improv the way he can and was never really given an opportunity to do so is essentially what people in AEW are really celebrating. The fact that they are able to be more themselves. That, for me at least, is a very good thing, and I think he will be able to do a lot more here. The idea of having him as the best man with that, Jericho once again has mentioned that could be branding going forwards. It could simply be that is the situation that we have. Chris Jericho has said best man, and Miro will be best man. Much like Hanson Miro, we have best man Miro, which I like. Also, a lot of his history has involved marriage and his wife, of course. His feud with Roman Reigns happened over a wedding cake, and that is one of the most prominent feuds he's had. Miro's one of those who's always feuded with big names, feuded with John Cena, feuded with Randy Orton, feuded with Roman Reigns, feuded with Dean Ambrose for a while. He's always feuded with big names in WWE, but never really had that one big defining moment. So I think in AEW, he's got a large collection of people he can work with. There is a lot of people who are a size that can work with him if they just want to go to brute force matches, and a lot of people who can work as a Styles Clash of people who are, for example, smaller, including Kip Sabian, including Young Bucks, including Kenny Omega. There's a lot of people who could work very well with Miro. If you do have any questions, please do remember to just ask them straight away. I can assure you I will get to them as quickly as possible. I am trying to take my time a little bit on the questions recently. I did realize in a Raw preview over on Sportskeeda's Facebook recently that I had 112 questions to answer in an hour. I ended up 4 or 5 minutes behind in the questions, and I just had to fly through them. It feels less like a Raw preview now than it ever has, but I still have to get through the questions that I've got. That doesn't happen here. Obviously, my YouTube is a bit more quiet, nothing compared to the 3 million followers that the Sportskeeda have on their YouTube, on their Facebook, I should say. At the minute, I have, I believe, 560 on YouTube, which is still tremendous for a one-man show who's doing his best to bring news to people and bring entertainment to people. It's wrestling, isn't it? Always a good thing to discuss. I'm just going to check. I haven't got any questions that I've missed. Nope, no questions missed. Okay. Next piece of news that I have that I want to talk about is about the just got a question. Mandy said, I wonder if they sent Mandy over to Raw because they need a challenger for Asuka. Very possible. As I mentioned, there aren't many faces clearly at the top in the women's division on Raw, but there aren't many faces in the women's division on Raw at all. Liv Morgan and Ruby Riott, Mandy Rose now and Asuka. That's basically it. And when you have Natalya, Lana, I guess Mickie James counts as a face. That's a fair point. But you have Natalya, Lana, whatever is happening with Peyton Royce, Billie Kay. You had Sasha Banks and Bayley. You also have Shayna Baszler, Nia Jax, and a couple of other people who don't get much in the way of TV time. There really isn't much in that top level. I believe they could push Bianca Belair up there, but she doesn't seem to be getting the backing of the company, and I think that's a real shame. I'd also like to see Zelina Vega wrestle more, but maybe that's just a dream that I have at this point because it seems like she's not there to wrestle. A crying shame. It has been announced that on this week's Raw, we are going to see a match between Drew McIntyre and Keith Lee. That's quite exciting, and they've been building to that for a little while, especially when it comes to Drew McIntyre dragging Randy Orton out of matches. Keith Lee so far has a losing record in the WWE, primarily because he keeps losing matches by DQ, and he's only actually won the one match. So he's lost 3 and won 1, and he's still never been pinned or submitted. It's an interesting situation to be in, and I think he has every right to be annoyed and want a bit of revenge on Drew McIntyre. That could be interesting. I think it's also telling that when Keith Lee lost the championship to Karrion Kross, Drew McIntyre was there at NXT. He had asked to go down and be involved in a segment in which he could say who he was and who he was rooting for. So they played up to their friendship pretty early on to really show that it was there before Keith Lee debuted. Pardon me. While I think that match is going to be very high quality, I'm really not sure I can see Keith Lee winning it. Certainly not clean. I think, if anything, Drew McIntyre will be dragged out of the match by Randy Orton. We'll get a bit of a swap, as it were, and it'll just be a bit more of the same. Not necessarily a bad situation. I think it's a way of protecting Keith Lee, but it's also not a way of protecting Keith Lee, because that would make his win record 20% so far. Not great. I know that we hear a lot from WWE that wins and losses don't matter, but a 20% win record is worse than Bray Wyatt before he became The Fiend. And in fact, if we look at Bray Wyatt, since he's become The Fiend, it's still not exactly fantastic, his win-loss record. Bray Wyatt's always been one of those. Ellie Lynn says, I know it's early to call, but could the long-term plan be with Mandy going to Raw, Sonya Deville returning at the Rumble, winning, and therefore challenging the Raw champion Mandy at Mania? Still could. It still could very much be that. It still also could have been that on SmackDown, but I think at this point they are intending to push it back and have Sasha versus Bayley at WrestleMania. Even if we do get the match at Hell in a Cell, I think Bayley will retain regardless of what happens brand-wise, and then it will lead into WrestleMania. That would be exciting for me, and I'm excited to see that happen. It would be a good main event, certainly. Outside of that, it's difficult to predict what the main event would be right now. Possibly Roman Reigns versus The Fiend, if they can hold off the feud with The Fiend that long. But once again, it is impossible right now to say what that main event is going to be, primarily because with a draft coming, anyone can move anywhere. We could be expecting to see Roman Reigns versus The Fiend, but then they move The Fiend back to Raw, or they swap the championships, and we end up with The Fiend challenging Roman, losing at Hell in a Cell, and then trying to line up against Drew McIntyre next because Drew McIntyre comes over to face some new challengers. We could then see Drew versus AJ, we could see Drew versus Braun, we could see Drew versus Roman, of course, if Roman is still there or if someone loses the championship on the way. Difficult. Donna Zuckerwa, welcome. Thank you for your first question. Says anything about Brock Lesnar. At the moment, there has been no advancement about Brock Lesnar. He is currently without a contract, but to my knowledge, there is no one really interested in AEW. That has been confirmed by Chris Jericho in the interview rounds recently. It hasn't been confirmed by Tony Khan. Tony Khan said no comment, which I think is the right way to go about it, because the more AEW people talk about Brock Lesnar, the more likely Brock Lesnar is to get a bumper contract and a raise. At the moment, the WWE are trying to avoid looking like they're spending money. It's why they're not doing big announcements of talent that they have signed, and it's why they haven't announced Rey Mysterio's contract yet, for example, even though Rey Mysterio is back on Raw and is involved, even if he isn't wrestling all that much so far. Matt Hendricks says, what's next for Alexa Bliss and Bray Wyatt? That story will continue to develop. Alexa Bliss isn't planned to immediately go into the Firefly Funhouse, but she will very, very much be involved in attempting to entrance the Fiend. She's going to be a major part of the storyline going forwards. What we can confirm, though, is that the Fiend isn't necessarily that big a fan of what Alexa Bliss is doing. It could simply be that he doesn't want to talk to her, but I believe the storyline as they're going forwards, Alexa Bliss is trying to entrance the Fiend because she is entranced by the Fiend. She is trying to essentially change to become what he wants. And I don't know if that's going to succeed at first, but it may succeed long term. I would imagine if we are going to get a short-term feud with Roman, it'll be Alexa Bliss who ruins the Fiend's chances, as it were. But if we get it long-term, it may be Alexa Bliss that is the cause for victory. I'm also very excited to see Paul Heyman versus Alexa Bliss speaking for their clients in a ring. But I do think that is a very much later or early next year feud rather than a later this year feud, depending on the draft. All storylines right now are planned out, but up in the air. Matt also asked, when is the next draft? It's impossible to say right now. There isn't a lined up, secure and confirmed date for it. I reported at the end of last year that the next shakeup would also feature NXT, and that has been confirmed by Triple H in a recent conference call. The rumor is October, end of October, possibly around Hell in a Cell time, definitely, but I believe it'll be dependent on whether they can get crowds into the arena. If they can renegotiate the contract, we will see the draft once they have people, even at limited capacity, in the arena to pop when new people come out and when things change. Jagger says, don't you think that WWE botched the booking for Liv and Ruby because they don't seem as a credible threat for Shayna and Nia, and then what? Nobody seems to be high on Liv anymore. I wouldn't say they botched the booking per se. I think Shayna and Nia have been made to look incredibly strong, and they needed to. They really genuinely needed to. This is very much a righting of the ship for Shayna as much as anyone, who had a big moment at Elimination Chamber and then sort of drifted out of public consciousness. This has got her back to that level. I think when it comes to Liv and Ruby, they've had a much more realistic development. They've only recently really got back as a team, and they've been effective as a team. They beat the Iconics pretty clean when they've had the opportunities to do so, and when they've lost, it is via cheating or at least dirty finishes. So I wouldn't say they botched it. I also think it's very beneficial for Liv and Ruby that we recently had the victory over Shayna Baszler, even though it was admittedly a handicap match. It was a win. Liv did pin Shayna Baszler, and after that she was set to pin Nia Jax before Retribution prevented her from doing so. Matt says, whose idea was it to have Alexa Bliss joining Bray Wyatt? And I can see this being like Harley Quinn and the Joker. A lot of people are making that comparison. I also see Belle and the Beast a little bit in this particular storyline. They're playing it out very smoothly, I think. The initial idea, to my knowledge, was Bray Wyatt and Alexa Bliss's. They did communicate about this. It wasn't a WWE storyline that was necessarily pitched to them, but it was people who saw that they were getting on, saw that they had similar interests, and both Bray and Alexa have been involved in the writing of this storyline to some degree. I think that's one of the reasons it is so compelling, because while I do have a lot of faith in the writing team in some regards, particularly when you look at how Roman's come in, there are some stories that repeat. We see quite a lot of repeats, as it were, and you can tell a writer is doing something because they do have certain fingerprints. As a writer myself, I can pick out sometimes which writer is working on what because of certain tells that they have and repeated structures that they do. For example, if it involves urine, you can pretty much guarantee who's writing it and who thinks it's hilarious. But when it comes to this, it does feel incredibly different, and that is a good thing. Donna says, I heard WWE wants fans before the Royal Rumble. They do. They want fans tomorrow. They want fans the day after. They want fans every single day that they can. They were trying to get fans in before SummerSlam. They tried to negotiate that with the Amway Center, but were not successful, as well as negotiating with the local office senators and the like, people in charge of the state. I'm not that au fait with American politics to know who particularly I'm discussing here, but I know Governor Ron DeSantis was obviously involved in the negotiations there. So they have wanted fans since day one. I reported 6 days before the official announcement that WrestleMania would take place behind closed doors with no fans in attendance. That is one of those things that I keep chasing up more information as to when they feel they can get fans back, and I'm constantly told they're pushing it back, and doing the best that they can. So nothing to report. Matt Hendricks says, do you see Toni Storm being drafted to the main roster or go to normal NXT? Not sure. I did note that she wasn't in the advertisement for NXT UK, neither was Tyler Bate. There were a couple of other people who were missing as well. So I'm not sure where they are or what is going to happen with them, but I don't believe they are able to travel to the United States at the moment, similarly to PAC not being able to travel to Florida. There are certain states which have a no-fly ban on them from the United Kingdom. It is possible that they could get there via flying to a different country and then flying to the United States, but that isn't necessarily the easiest move to make. So I'm really not sure. I think with Toni Storm, we could see her in NXT. The NXT women's division is looking a bit weak at the moment, especially if they take out Rhea Ripley and if Io Shirai moves at any point. But with a couple of people missing from that, they are taking at the mid-card level in the women's division. You look at Mercedes Martinez, Chelsea Green, people who aren't real main event women's talent on that brand at the moment, but who hopefully will do well on the main roster. Ellie asks, who can you see winning the steel cage tomorrow, Rollins or Dominic? Hard to say. Seth Rollins hasn't been losing in the same way that that Buddy Murphy has. I think this may be the start of Rollins versus Murphy. I'd like it to be, but with Rey Mysterio being injured, a lot of things are up in the air at the moment. Also, Raw hasn't had much of a refresh. SmackDown since SummerSlam has changed a lot of its storylines. There's a lot of different things going on, and it's really shaking things up, whereas Raw hasn't done that. We're still seeing the same divisions, even though there may be movement in those divisions. Cedric Alexander moving to the Hurt Business, for example, that is still the same small group of people working in one area of Raw and another small group of people working in another area of Raw, and so on and so forth. Alistair Black has been lucky enough to shake it up, but that's just because Kevin Owens needed an opponent, and I think eventually he will be facing off against Drew McIntyre as well. So hard to say. I don't think Dominic gets a win over Rollins here, but with the steel cage being involved and the family being involved, I can imagine it's going to be heavily overbooked, just like it all has been so far. Dominic, for me, has been very impressive so far. I reported a year ago that he would be skipping NXT and debuting on the main roster. In fact, a year and a month ago that was going to happen. And for me, that's very exciting. Very exciting indeed. I think he's done great things. I'm constantly hearing how high everyone is on this guy. So I'm waiting. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. Becky Day Carter says, do you think WWE has any matches locked in for WrestleMania yet? This is a real tough one. Up to a couple of years ago, they had the card for WrestleMania essentially locked in a year in advance. Like a year in advance. When Charlotte Flair beat Asuka and retained that SmackDown Women's Championship, when Ronda Rousey debuted, you could say with almost certainty that the plan for next year would be Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey, and it was. But then lately, they've been paying a bit more attention to the fans. Becky Lynch managed to get into that main event by simply being successful. Kofi Kingston wasn't supposed to be going up against Daniel Bryan. It was supposed to be Kevin Owens versus Daniel Bryan. But Kofi Kingston forced himself into it. And I believe Seth Rollins was always the plan for Brock Lesnar. But that was the 3 big babyface wins at that show. Up until recently. So a lot of change recently with superstar shakeups, wildcard rules, and then drafts. On WrestleMania was just up in the air until basically WrestleMania. And then this year, with the fact that everything's been locked down and so many people weren't available, storylines have been changing almost on a nightly basis. You look at when Sami Zayn came back, they didn't know until a couple of weeks before the show that he was going to be coming back. And that is one of the reasons we saw Jeff Hardy win the Intercontinental Championship, to give him an immediate challenger. It also may have affected Matt Riddle's push, because Matt Riddle's initial plan push is definitely not this. Jagged says, why WWE wouldn't try to bring fans in an open venue like New Japan Pro Wrestling and Warrior Wrestling just yesterday? Because they don't have a contract in place to do that. They were able to do that at the Performance Center. However, literally the day they did that is when they announced that they had had an outbreak of COVID, or at least someone had COVID. They didn't formally announce any sort of outbreak, even though I did report when they hit 30 people, for example, that had happened. Other than that, there are a number of other restrictions. The United States has very different laws to New Japan. Obviously, Warrior Wrestling was able to do things the way they were, but WWE now are locked into the Amway Center, and they are prohibited from bringing fans into that venue. Matt says, seems like prior to COVID, WWE plans to put Toni in normal NXT. Possibly, she was still doing work in NXT UK. She was still involved there, and she was really one of the big names there. The NXT UK women's division really did come down to 3 women at the top, and then they needed to start building other women because they did seem to be struggling. It was Kaylee Ray, it was Piper Niven, it was Toni Storm. They had a big triple threat at TakeOver Blackpool, which I was in the venue for, and it was a lot of fun. But other than that, when it comes to the NXT UK women's scene, even though they've got a lot of talent there, not a lot of women have been pushed towards the championship yet. So I'm not sure that was the plan for Toni Storm. But like I say, we haven't seen her advertised. We haven't seen her in NXT. There isn't a possibility to just constantly be swapping and changing. So she could be pretty much anywhere at this point, to be honest. Matt J. Hendricks says, I may have asked this before, but I think Su Young's character would have been a perfect fit to Firefly Funhouse. Has she signed with the WWE? She has not. She is still very much with Impact Wrestling. And if she did join, I doubt she would be joining the Firefly Funhouse because Bray Wyatt wants to work with people that he knows, and he doesn't really know Su Yung, to my knowledge. Peter Robert, welcome. Thank you for your first question. Says, hey, Tom Colohue, do you think Drew McIntyre will lose against Randy Orton at WWE Clash of Champions? I do not. I believe that Drew McIntyre will retain once again, and that will lead us into Hell in a Cell between Drew McIntyre and Randy Orton. I think the feud is going to keep intensifying. I think it's a big deal that Keith Lee's being involved at the moment, and that keeps Drew McIntyre and Randy Orton from coming to blows all that much, especially in an actual wrestling ring. So far, McIntyre and Orton have actually only shared a wrestling ring one time since just before Drew McIntyre's push started towards the WWE Championship in early January, late December, when he was in a match with AJ Styles and Randy Orton, and he pinned Randy Orton then. Randy Orton has been laying down for Drew McIntyre for quite a while. Matt says, was there ever plans to put the WWE Championship on Nakamura at Mania 34, or was Styles always a plan? Styles was always the plan. They were planning that match for a long time. This is one that they did have almost a year in advance. They were teasing it at Money in the Bank earlier that year because they did have that match on the cards, as it were. They did sort of pivot briefly to Jinder Mahal, but he was never planned to be a championship going into WrestleMania or coming out of WrestleMania. That was very much to appeal to a certain audience and a certain market, a market that I'm familiar with my work with Sportskeeda. So it's the exact same audience. To my knowledge, there was no plan to put the championship on Nakamura. They wanted to put him on the big stage to elevate him in that way, but they didn't plan to actually put a world championship on him. Donna Zuckwell says, I heard Sasha Banks going to be on Smackdown. She is. I did discuss that at the beginning of the video, but to do a quick recap, she will be coming in, she'll be cutting a promo, and she may be getting involved in the Bayley versus Nikki Cross feud. I would like to potentially see that go to a triple threat, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think she will step in immediately after Bayley defeats Nikki Cross, and then that will lead them into a Hell in a Cell match, and Sasha Banks will complete the set, having wrestled Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, and Bayley in Hell in a Cell. Noob says, Raw's women's division is becoming less interesting. At least Asuka is doing a great job overall, minus the screwy finishes. Hopefully Asuka will hold down the division until Charlotte or Becky return. Charlotte Flair, I believe, is likely to return sooner rather than later, by which I mean I believe she will be returning closer to the end of this year than the beginning of next one. At that point, Asuka will certainly have challenges, but it is quite telling that Mandy Rose has been moved over to extend the possible feuds Asuka can have. Asuka, in her time as champion, has not had a conclusive win at any point. There has always been either an interference or a distraction, or Nia Jax getting angry with referees. There's always been something. So hopefully that doesn't continue and we can see Asuka get some dominant wins, or at least just some wins. Anthony says, hello, Tom. Hello, Anthony. Welcome back. Jagged says, would Nikki be involved on the Bray and Alexa storyline after Clash of Champions? I believe she would. I think there is a lot to tell there, and Nikki Cross is the right person to tell it. She obviously has a lot of history with Alexa Bliss, And I think her general character and personality could fit well in some element with Bray. I don't think she should let Alexa just wander off to the dark side. And I don't think she's going to. I don't think she has any intention of doing that. Thank you to everyone watching at the moment. Please, if you haven't yet, remember to give the video a like. That helps me grow, get more people in here, get more questions, longer videos, and that means as well that I can potentially, hopefully, make money off this one day, make a living, and do it full time. I'm spending the next 6 months trying to get full time doing this. It is not easy, but thank you to everyone who's joining me so far and everyone asking questions, because that's a big help, as well as everyone who likes the video. Matt J. Hendricks says, what's next for Alistair Black after Owens? A WWE title feud after being undefeated on the main roster, or a move to SmackDown? Hard to say. A move to SmackDown for Alistair Black creates a chain reaction. That means that Zelina Vega would move to SmackDown. It would mean that Andrade would move to SmackDown, as well as he is her client. And it would also mean, because of that, that Charlotte Flair moved to SmackDown, even though Charlotte was happy to work NXT. However, with everyone at the moment working out of the Amway Center, that may not be the case, because ultimately everyone still comes home, doesn't do anywhere near as many live shows. They still get to see everyone, which is one of the reasons I think Tommaso Ciampa may be a lot more interested now in coming to the main roster compared to when they were doing a full touring schedule and working 5-6 matches a week. Nowadays, people are working one match per week at most. So I think logically for Alistair Black, I would immediately put him in a feud with Drew McIntyre, probably right after Survivor Series, going into the main event of TLC, or at least a match at TLC. I think those two could really make magic, and I think that would be a fitting match for Alistair Black to, it would be a big loss, but it would be a loss nonetheless. Also, to be honest, I think Alistair Black would be a good person to take the championship from Drew McIntyre. I think that would be a great match, a sort of an underdog surprise, and I think he'd be a very good champion going forwards. Anthony says, now that Tessa did her indie show last night, that was Warrior Wrestling, as we've actually discussed earlier, drop the title and do a post-match goodbye, or are all eyes on her now? Absolutely, they are. What is next for Tessa Blanchard? We are not entirely sure. I have reported previously that the WWE are interested. People have been talking to WWE management to sing Tessa's praises, to say you should hire her, and I strongly suspect that is where she's going. Can't say for certain, though. Anthony said, with those things, AJ was quoted as saying not legit. Can I ask you to give me a bit of more information there? If it was the report that spread like wildfire through some of the dirt sheets, essentially saying that AJ Styles had said he was going to be retiring, and on last week's SmackDown, as in SmackDown 2 days ago, he would be announcing it, that did not happen. But what happened was one person reported it, and then someone reported it from that report, and then someone reported it from that report, and it's what we call confirmation bias. Even if he had said those things, there is a context there. There is. And that's something that needs to be considered. I have reported that the end of this contract is when AJ Styles will be looking to retire. He has mentioned that himself, and I believe that to be the case. And I believe that's also the main reason why AJ Styles has not been put in any championship matches for a while now, and by which I mean top-level championships. Ellie says, is it likely WWE would have a WrestleMania 37 main event be a women's match? It is likely. I wouldn't say it's definitely going to happen. But if they have a big enough storyline for it, it can be a tag match. If they have a big enough storyline for it, it can be an R2 24/7 title defense. It really is just about the top, just the top tier. If you are the top tier match, you will get the women's main event. If you will get the main event, and I believe Sasha Banks and Bayley could do that. Anthony says, is the reason Mandy got moved to Raw because someone is coming with a similar gimmick? I don't believe so. Mandy Rose no longer has a pretty woman sort of gimmick. She is much more of a fighter now. She has made some cosmetic changes recently, by which I mean her attire and obviously shorter hair. And I think at the moment she's just looking like a badass. She's looking like a potential champion. It's very much storyline at the moment, and I don't know how long she'll be on Raw. I definitely don't know how long she'll be without Otis. Peter Roberts says, do you think Drew McIntyre will hold the WWE Championship until Brock Lesnar returns to WWE? It depends how long that is. It could be quite a while, because Brock Lesnar, there was definitely interest in bringing him in over the past few months, but because of the COVID situation, that has not transpired. Because of the travel restrictions, that has not transpired. So at the moment, we are where we are. Brock Lesnar could be returning soon if they're able to get fans in, soon if they're able to negotiate a new contract, but at the moment, that is not the case. And if for example, Brock Lesnar did return at the Royal Rumble leading into WrestleMania and face Drew McIntyre in the main event of WrestleMania, personally, I'd have Drew McIntyre win that, is all I'll say. Matt says Asuka did beat Charlotte clean. I have to disagree on that. Yes, it was technically clean victory, but Charlotte Flair had already been injured by Nia Jax earlier in the night. So it's protecting Charlotte as well. Anthony says, what's next for Cole? I'd imagine you mean Adam and not Michael. The Too Sweet with Balor sort of signaled goodbye for me. Hard to say. It definitely signals a face turn, as it were. It may be goodbye. It may be we will see him move. But if he does move, I would prefer to see that in a draft. I have reported previously there were some problems with the idea that they wanted to call up the entire Undisputed Era, but there were certain people who were unwilling to do that. I didn't want to name any names. I still don't. Some people have come at me for being vague on that, but I don't want to say any names and potentially get anyone in trouble, as it were, or force anyone to defend themselves. Matt Hendricks said Killian Dane is on NXT and Nikki Cross on SmackDown, so keeping couples together wouldn't matter. That depends. If the couple are already together, they don't want to split them up. Whereas if the couple aren't necessarily together at the time of doing it, it could be that they don't want to immediately put them together. Again, right now, things are very different. But I do think at some point, Killian Dane and Nikki Cross will be on the same show. They didn't even, that was the most interesting thing. Nikki Cross stayed behind when they debuted Sanity. It was so confusing. Jermaine Presley says, what is the WWE's plan for Keith Lee? I am not entirely sure at the moment. I have constantly heard that he's going to get a big push. Constantly hearing that from a lot of different people, basically the same report saying he's going to get a big push. He certainly has had good moments. Beating Randy Orton clean is very good, but so far his win-loss record is 75% losses, regardless of the fact that quite a few of them are disqualifications. So while he's going to have big matches, I don't see him going immediately for any big championships. I think we will see Keith Lee against Bobby Lashley sooner rather than later. Matt Hendricks says AJ joked about the report about retiring. Of course he did. AJ Styles is very self-aware. He's very aware of reports. For example, someone did report that AJ Styles was being bullied, and that's why he moved to SmackDown. Not the case to my knowledge, though I am aware that certain people in the locker room have been mocking him for his views. I did report that, and it was confirmed shortly afterwards by Randy Orton on the After the Bell podcast with Corey Graves. I hope I'm remembering the name right. I don't want to do any disservice to that. Anthony says, so I'm guessing WWE must have forgot about Naomi, or is that after Clash? Hard to say. Really hard to say. There was obviously a very strong rumor that Naomi was going to be getting a push. That just hasn't happened. It just hasn't. I'm not sure. I chose to believe that based on how I looked at her being positioned at the time, but she wasn't in the Fatal 4-Way. She wasn't. And really, ideally, she should have been. It could be that that is a plan after Clash of Champions, but then what you do with Sasha Banks. Is her push simply going to be losing to the champion again? Because we've had that and it wasn't a push. Peter Roberts says, is WWE taking the Money in the Bank contract away from Otis? At the moment, to my knowledge, there is no plan to do that, but they are giving Otis a long-term storyline that continually reminds you that he is Mr. Money in the Bank. Anthony says, right now I could see 3 women's Mania matches, Charlotte versus Tessa, Asuka versus Charlotte, and Sasha versus Bayley. Asuka versus Charlotte, the WWE would have no issue putting that on as a main event. Sasha and Bayley, the same. However, Tessa Blanchard, at this moment, to my knowledge, has not signed with the WWE, and I cannot confirm that there is the intention to do so. It's a difficult one. Once I know, you guys will know, but I can't say it's happened. So, like I say, once I know, you will know as well. Matt Hendricks says, how long do you see EO as NXT Women's Champion? I see her being champion for a while. I agree with that. I think at the moment there aren't really that many people to feud with her, though. I think this is one of the reasons they're trying to build up Raquel Gonzalez. I can imagine she's going to beat Rhea Ripley and come after EO next, and then maybe Ripley. So NXT are able to have longer championship reigns because they defend their championships much more rarely. That is one of the main things that we see. We aren't going to see the NXT championship defended for a little while, for example, at least until next month, where we are going to have an NXT takeover. And that, curiously, will be just before the rumored draft. So winners and losers there will be very, very telling. Anthony says WWE is absolutely on fire on Fridays, but Mondays feel so boring. I actually kind of agree. I think SmackDown's been incredible recently. It's really hit a new level. And yeah, this week it dipped down a little bit, but there's only so many major storylines you can pay off in the way that they have. Whereas Mondays, I do struggle a little bit to get through it because we are seeing a lot of the same feuds, a lot of the same matches, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of mini divisions. Jagged says, do you think that according to Stephanie, Vince really does listen to the fans? I think so. WWE must have some sort of research, data research team that brings up to him stats and stuff. They do. They have analytics. They have people analyzing things. They do have people who report to him essentially saying, here's the most watched videos on YouTube and things like that. I think WWE does pay attention to what the fans are saying. I think that's one of the reasons Becky Lynch was such a success. Kofi Kingston was such a success. I think recently they paid a lot more attention, but at the same time, they clearly don't pay all of the attention and bend to the will of the fans, as it were, or Naomi would be in a lot better position right now. Anthony said, my belief is if someone is either close to signing or signed, you never mention who the name is, or it could unintentionally ruin things. I completely agree with that. If I come in here and say, for example, Tessa Blanchard has signed with the WWE, she has a 3-year contract, and she will work 200 matches in that time, if she is able to work 200 matches, depending on COVID, as it were. Then it could be that report gets out, the WWE decide to sour on the situation. It has happened before. So when it comes to new contract signings, I'm usually quite coy. For example, just before Braun Strowman's contract was announced as being renewed, I announced that he was due for a monster push. They would bring the monster back. And then a couple of weeks later, they announced he signed a new contract. Right before Gallows and Anderson signed a new contract, I put a report up on Sportskeeda because they'd been paired up with AJ Styles. And I did mention that was a promise that the WWE made in order to convince them to sign new contracts. And then they signed new contracts. So it's a good mention and something definitely worth mentioning. And also thank you for giving me a chance to plug some of my reporting. Anthony says, is it me or are you getting tired of ambulance angles? The last ambulance match was Great Balls of Fire, wasn't it? I have no issue with it. A lot of people getting sent away in ambulances. That is definitely true when it comes to outside of matches, actual angles. The Fiend was sent away in an ambulance. Now we've had Drew and Randy Orton sent away in ambulances. Clearly people are getting hurt a lot, is all I'll say. Ellie said, WWE said that Mandy was, quote, traded to Raw. Do you think this means a Raw woman will be going to SmackDown? Difficult, because there is a lot of owing going on in the draft. You look at Bianca Belair, Forgotten Sons, Shayna Baszler coming up to Raw and SmackDown. Nobody ever went back to NXT other than Charlotte, who had won the championship. Other than that, when it comes to Apollo Crews moving over, when you look at last year when Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross were moved over for future trades, nobody's keeping track of this. Nobody. Mandy Rose could have been the trade that was due for AJ Styles. I don't think they ever actually did the trade for that. So it's really hard to say. Matt Hendricks says, I see Sasha winning the Rumble and beating Bayley at Mania. I could see that too, and that would be very exciting for me. Anthony says, one thing that really upsets me when someone heads to the hospital, they return an ambulance. So then by logic, Orton, Sasha, and Big E will. I would love to see WWE be that self-parodying, where Sasha returns in the same way Drew McIntyre did, beats up Bayley, puts her in an ambulance, and off she goes. Big E does the exact same thing, puts Sheamus in an ambulance, and off he goes. And Orton does the same with Drew McIntyre, and just every week you get that. I don't think they would parody themselves that much, not intentionally anyway. Peter Roberts says, what are your thoughts on AEW and WWE taking shots at each other? If it's all in good fun, that's fine for me. And we've seen news recently, Chris Jericho saying on his Saturday Night Special show that essentially he still talks to a lot of people in the WWE. While he was contracted to AEW, or at least working with AEW, he appeared at the Greatest Royal Rumble. A lot of people in WWE still really respect Chris Jericho. I've spoken to people about this, and a lot of people, while they may be upset at him as a competitor, there is no upset with him as a person. A lot of people in WWE still really respect Chris Jericho and still really hope to work with him at some point in the future. So if it's all in good fun, I'm fine with it. It does sometimes cross the line a little bit for me, and I would like it if people focus more on what they were doing, but both sides are guilty of that. Guinness Gamer says, hi Tom, hi Guinness, welcome. Matt says, who is Balor's first opponent as NXT champion? Ciampa. And where do you think Karrion Kross lands when he comes back? I think Karrion Kross will return to NXT when he does return, and I think he will get back that championship, go on a bit of a tear for 9 months to a year, then move to main roster. I think he's going to be made a draw in NXT. I don't think he's quite the NXT draw yet. However, they've done great things with him so far, and he has enough of a reputation personally and a cool enough entrance that people really care. As regards Balor's first opponent, Tommaso Ciampa is a logical first choice, and I think Velveteen Dream will be lining up shortly afterwards. Anthony says it's like Vince woke up and said, let's book a pay-per-view level Raw tomorrow, but knowing WWE will end up boring. The intention behind this week's Raw is to compete with the return of Monday Night Football. So they have tried to put together a show that they have branded In Your Face, horrible title, in the attempt to compete ahead of time with Monday Night Football. The WWE are always very aware of what's going on other shows. For example, when there was, I believe it was a presidential debate, and there was a Smackdown Soul pay-per-view on that night, they opened with a triple threat WWE Championship match and main evented with Randy Orton versus Bray Wyatt with no championships involved, because they believed at that time that they wanted to have the big match first to try and retain as much audience before the show on the other side really started. So they are very aware of that, and that's why they've booked it. Guinness Gamer says at the moment, I just think SmackDown is new. Each week, Raw feels the same. Could be a result of Bruce over both shows, and obviously SmackDown is a moneymaker. To be fair, SmackDown, when Bruce Pritchard first took over, felt quite formulaic to me. They hit the same notes. They had the same people working with the same people. It felt like Raw does now. Recently, they have hit their strides. There has been a lot of changes in the backroom staff. People have been released. Things have changed in that regard. But when it comes to SmackDown, there was a down period. There really was. It's come up since. And I think with Bruce working on Raw as well, that we are seeing the down period right now. But it will start to go up short term, and then we'll see it come. I think SmackDown is one of the best wrestling shows you can see at the moment. I think it definitely competes at the very top level. Definitely the best show WWE are putting on right now. And if they can get Raw to that level, everyone will be happy, because we are seeing ratings increase quite substantially for SmackDown because of the storylines they put together, the return of Roman Reigns, what's going on with Bray Wyatt and Alexa Bliss, and Sasha Banks and Bayley. They also did great work with Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville, until obviously Sonya Deville is taking some time away, and I wish her all the best. Peter Roberts said, who will take the WWE Universal Championship away from Roman Reigns? I suspect The Fiend, but that depends whether or not The Fiend is drafted, or if Roman Reigns is drafted. It's really hard to say storyline-wise what's going to happen with a draft coming up. Matt says, I don't know why people are getting traded when there is a draft coming up. I agree. I really agree. This is one of the reasons I think Mandy Rose isn't going to be very long on Raw. It's a shock and really quite stunning right now. I think this is one of the reasons Adam Cole is still in NXT right now. I strongly believe he's going to be coming up, and I think they are waiting for the draft because it's a big deal. It'll get people tuning in, and draft episodes always do particularly well. Anyway, Noob says, do you believe that Ronda Rousey is coming back, and who do you think her major feud will be? I would say either Asuka or Charlotte Flair. Well, one thing I really find entertaining when it comes to Ronda Rousey is that her contract with the WWE, as the WWE announced it, is still ongoing. But we haven't seen her since a 12-month period expired. I did report, and this is genuinely exclusive because a lot of other news reporters said, attempted to call bullshit on this particular report, that she would be working from WrestleMania to WrestleMania, a 12-month contract, and that is exactly what happened. Since then, we have seen her on Total Divas, so she's still been involved with the WWE. She's on the After the Bell podcast with Corey Graves, and when I did, in fact, report the 12-month contract, I got a lot of people saying, yeah, but she's on this podcast. You don't have to be under WWE contract to be on that podcast. She also does a lot of work on her own gaming sites, and I really enjoy that. Like, I just really enjoy watching her channel quite often because she's a very good smack talker. She really is. I think she is coming back. I think it will be very limited dates, and probably more limited than her original contract, even though she didn't wrestle that many matches, certainly not on Raw at least, but she did appear a lot. So I think she will be coming back, and I think her major feud will be Becky Lynch, because you can walk into that feud. I think it'll be a while, though, at least until after her initial contract was set to expire in April 2021. Guinness Gamer says Rock Roman WrestleMania Hollywood could happen, and that would be a very, very fitting main event. It is a big match, isn't it? Matt Hendrick says apparently Ziggler and Rude was a trade for AJ Styles. Fair. That's definitely something worth commenting on. That was mentioned by Dolph Ziggler when he went over. Rude is technically on Raw. He just hasn't appeared yet. So it could be that was a trade for AJ Styles. I think it was mentioned and I just forgot about it, to be fair. Jagged said the same. The pieces that Raw got back from AJ Styles are Bobby Roode and Ziggler. Thanks for letting me know, guys. Sometimes I do forget things and it's nice to have a few reminders and context. I don't know everything and it's important that everyone knows that when they come in here. Anthony says, what logic does WWE have in Retribution having a graphic and WWE even promoting people that are there to destroy your show? Good question. Very good question. It could be that they hacked the Thunderdome and they just have someone in there who just really, really likes the fact that they are in Retribution. But who knows? I am interested to see what the next steps are. I think it was very interesting using Mojo Rawley in the way that they did to really cause some confusion. And I think that particular graphic is going to end up on T-shirts very, very soon. And what excuse will WWE have for that? Matt Hendricks says Greatest Royal Rumble was in 2018. It is. However, to my knowledge, Chris Jericho had already agreed to work with AEW at that time. Leland says it was Dolph Ziggler. Yep. Anthony says, count me as one who doesn't want to like the new Carmella Lena. Carmella Lena is the word I'm going for as well with this. For Carmella, it's just a return to her previous character, the diva that she was. Essentially, she's just saying, I'm going back heel, which is fine by me. It means she can work with Naomi, for example, and if there is any trade, she can work with Peyton Royce. I think that would be interesting as well. She can work with Dana Brooke. We can have storylines underneath the top level on SmackDown. And also, if we do have Sasha Banks becoming a face and winning, Carmella can work with her. Matt Hendricks says Karrion Kross should be the person to beat Balor for the title. And I think bringing the Demon back for Karrion Kross is money. The Demon versus Doomsday is money. Possibly, I have reported recently that Finn Balor, that NXT had no interest in, the NXT had no plans to bring back the Demon King. They hadn't written any storyline out that used it. Part of that, and the main reason for it was that Finn Balor believed it was becoming a crutch, that Finn Balor essentially was a loser and the Demon King was a winner. Now, that is something that Finn Balor has himself confirmed. He confirmed it about a week and a half later in an interview with my colleague Stephanie Chase. Stephanie Chase Wrestling on YouTube. Please do check that out. So it would be a solid year, I believe, based on the projection of Karrion Kross's injury. But because they're in NXT, they don't defend the title that often, I could see that happening. I still have plenty of questions. I will be getting through them. Please, everyone who has joined so far, do remember to click like. That helps me grow, helps get more people in here. And I'm always very, very grateful for it because we do always seem to have less likes than viewers. So if we can get everyone clicking like, that does really help me grow. And I'm very grateful for it. Anthony says, do you still think Alexa ends up in the Funhouse? I do. I think she will essentially charm the Fiend to work her way in. Alexa is there for the Fiend. She is not there for Bray Wyatt. Guinness Gamer says, what do you think of a swerve of Nikki Cross joining Bray Wyatt? I just feel they wouldn't make Bliss a supernatural character long term. I feel they would. I feel they already have. And I don't feel necessarily that she's a supernatural character. She's just entranced by the Fiend. I think that spell will eventually be broken. Anthony says, prediction, Garza and Andrade swerve, cost Street Profits a match, and we see them feud for months longer. Hopefully not, but there aren't that many teams on Raw at the moment, which is, of course, why we have Cesaro and Nakamura there. I believe we would have seen Dominic and Rey Mysterio entering the title picture, and that's why we currently have this particular match. Maybe Rollins and Murphy will be stepping in. That's what I hope to see anyway. Matt Hendricks says, I feel like Adam Cole is SmackDown bound. I agree with that as well, but Raw may need people as well. Jagger says, I think Garza and Andrade are breaking up sooner rather than later. I think they've broken up 4 or 5 times already, and they need to actually just bloody do it. So they can both get on with it. They both need individual storylines, and they've just been locked in this storyline since before WrestleMania. Matt Hendricks says, what was WWE's reaction to when Asuka got a great reaction when Becky was choosing a replacement for Survivor Series 2018? They were locked into the storyline at that time. They were determined that Charlotte Flair would be taking on Ronda Rousey because they had already decided in that week that was when Becky Lynch was decided to be joining the match at WrestleMania. So that's, even though they got that great reaction, it did not make them change their mind whatsoever. They did try and work something out for Asuka. The idea that they had was Asuka versus Mandy Rose versus Sonya Deville. I reported on that, and then shortly afterwards, Asuka confirmed it. And then from there, that was going to be the match at WrestleMania. It didn't happen. Someone who pulled the rug decided that both championships would be on the line at WrestleMania. So the reaction, essentially, a few people who are fans of Asuka were really happy about it, but the overall reaction from WWE wasn't a reaction at all. Most of the push that Asuka has had since has come from Becky Lynch really fighting her corner. Anthony says, I guarantee you Carmella's new gimmick will involve her just being called Mella. I'd be interested to see that. I think she'll stick with Carmella, but she'll go back to Mella is money. Matt Hendricks says, is Mercedes Martinez getting called up after losing to Rhea? Yes, she has appeared on Raw for the last 3 weeks, I believe it is. Peter Roberts says, why has Brock Lesnar not competed at TLC or Elimination Chamber? I just want to know because he has not competed at those pay-per-view events. Because they are too close to Survivor Series, Royal Rumble, and WrestleMania, and Brock Lesnar only competes at major events. Anthony says, for AEW's 1-year anniversary show on October 14th, NXT presents Halloween Havoc. I don't believe so. They will be in direct competition at that time. So NXT will certainly put on a big show. I just don't necessarily think it will be in direct competition. I think they will save it for their takeover when it comes to this one. But we may see maybe a women's championship match. Guinness Gamer said, if you had to say now, in your opinion, who are the 5 members of Retribution? I can tell you who wore the masks last week. It was Dio Madden, Dominik Dijakovic, Mia Yim, Mercedes Martinez, and Mojo Rawley. So I would say those are the 5 members of Retribution. They were the people under the masks. Matt Hendricks says, Alexa Bliss didn't say she was frustrated. Seems like with creative, so pairing her with Bray is great. There are a number of things that Alexa Bliss has been told recently. She confirmed again on the After the Bell podcast with Corey Graves. That's a gold mine of news, I tell you that she was told she would not be competing for the WWE Championship for a while now. She was being taken out of that picture. And the champion, I say WWE Championship, the Women's Championship, as it were. And since then, she has used her time extremely well. She's been working to put over Nikki Cross. Now she's working with The Fiend. So even if creative did have nothing for her, Alexa Bliss is clearly creative enough personally that she's able to convince them that she's able to do more. There are people with very high opinions of Alexa Bliss. I've been told several times that a lot of people expect her to be the next big Hollywood breakout star. So I think it's very telling now that we are seeing her in this particular storyline. Daniel Price believes that Retribution is a garbage idea they didn't think all the way through, and it's going to wind up in a whole lot of apathy and bad booking. We will see going forward. If they need to kick on and do something bigger, for me, I don't feel they're doing anywhere near enough with it for it to be a top draw, top quality storyline. But I don't think it's bad either. I don't think it really takes that much away from the show, because at the very least, it's interesting to wonder when are they going to do something. I just wish they'd do more. Guinness Gamer says, just saw the match graphic there. Haven't been watching NXT. Are Dane and Maverick now a team? If so, yes, please. Love both guys. They're not necessarily a team. They are in a storyline together, but Dane has punched Maverick in the face last week. So not a team, or maybe it'll be a reluctant tag team at most. Anthony said it's a shame Matt is in AEW. They could do some cool and funny stuff with him and Bray. They still could. It would depend on what happens in the future. I think they did some interesting stuff, but ultimately injury meant that they didn't see it through, and then they just took people off TV, and we lost Bray Wyatt for about a year. Crazy world. Guinness Gamer says Garza or Andrade. They both have tremendous upside. Andrade is one of the best wrestlers in the world for me. Garza has that personality lockdown. So for me, it's sort of character versus wrestling. They're both very good wrestlers. They're both very good characters for me. Andrade shades it on the wrestling. Garza shades it on the character. And me, as more of a character fan than a wrestling fan, I would personally go Angel Garza. Anthony said, it hasn't been a good week for the Robert Stone brand, has it? Is it ever a good week for the Robert Stone brand? Robert Stone is a very committed man. He really works hard and really takes the embarrassment of his character to heart and ensures it is as embarrassing as possible. A lot of people like that. Vince likes that. Vince is a big fan of the Robert Stone brand, I tell you that, but it's not him writing it per se. I think Robert Stone does have a strong future in the company. If he keeps doing this, people will be big fans of his. I just hope he starts stepping in the ring a bit more often. But they do need people like that, people who can take the licking, people who are a bit more comedy characters. There is room for that in the WWE, particularly the first hour of Raw. Jagged says, is some higher up not high in Asuka, and how so? Asuka unfortunately does keep getting overlooked. I'm constantly hearing about how big a push she's going to get, but then we have Sasha Banks involved, and suddenly Asuka is losing almost every match to Sasha in the strangest of ways, or she just can't get a clean win. It doesn't look like people are that behind Asuka. And honestly, at this point, I don't believe that she is going to get that huge push. Daniel Price does say in response to that, Vince is actually fond of Asuka. That's why she got the title twice in less than 6 months. Getting the title twice isn't particularly a big sign of it in the way she lost it. I would also say that essentially Becky Lynch has had her corner to a high degree. If Becky Lynch didn't leave because she was pregnant, Asuka wouldn't have got that championship in the first place. Also, right now, there is a lack of women of high renown, as it were, people who are monumentally over to Asuka's level to put the title on. But maybe that's why Mandy Rose is there. For me, if everyone was that high on Asuka, Asuka would be winning matches clean, or at least without interference or distractions. Anthony says it's laughable how the members in Retribution make no sense to want Retribution. I agree with that. The name makes no sense compared to the people who are in it. Michael Latina says, what do you think the new AEW show will be like when it starts? I believe it'll be similar to the current AEW show. They will have a different setup. I have been told the setup, the staging will be different, but ultimately they are still going to be, it's still going to be very similar, high level, as it were. They are still going to deliver the same quality, and it won't be a case, I've been told this, it won't be a case of all the stars are on one show. It'll just mean that it's spread out a bit more. Maybe your top stars will be on this show, and then that show, and then this show, and then that show. But your mid-card will get a lot more attention. You'd see a lot more, for example, Brody Lee on one show than another. And at the same time, you'd see more of someone like Cody Rhodes on one show than another. People of similar levels would be on each show more prominently. They would spread them out to make sure everyone gets as over as possible, but it wouldn't be a case of this is the A show, this is the B show. Anthony says the promo Retribution cut on Raw made me think it was people who were released, but yet the NXT people. From what I can tell, and from conversations with released superstars, none of them want to be revealed to be in Retribution. One of them has been under a mask, but it was very much just a payday that they took while they couldn't work anywhere else. So other than that, and the people I have spoken to, there is no intention of released superstars to return to the WWE in pretty much any capacity. Matt Hendricks says, how about Killian Dane being a part of a new Wyatt family with Bliss and Cross? I can't see a new Wyatt family happening under any capacity. Personally, I think the Wyatt family has very much run its course, and to my knowledge, Bray Wyatt is not really interested in doing that anymore when the people that he did it with have, most of them have been let go now. Anthony says, would be funny if AEW's second show is just a show full of shots at WWE. Would it? Would it be funny? Again, if it's all in good fun, it's all in good fun, but would it? Daniel Price says they don't need another Wyatt family. This is your opinion I'm reading out, especially when so many people would sour on it because it's not Harper and Rowan. They would get an immediate negative reaction because of that. However, as I say, I don't believe there will be a new Wyatt family. Anthony said, did you catch WWE taking shots at AEW when they said Jeff Hardy did not lose consciousness? I did, and I think it's a little disappointing that Jeff Hardy is involved in those angles. But if, again, it's in good fun, it's in good fun. And on being the elite, they do consistently take shots at WWE. So I'm not going to blame anyone for this. It's par for the course, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Daniel Price believes WWE is petty. What do you expect? Well, if WWE are petty for doing that, then AEW are as well. Like I say, they're both as bad as each other. And if it's in good fun, it's in good fun. Anthony said, maybe Mandy's move to Raw has to do with Sonya. Possible. We won't know until at least a couple of months. Matt Hendricks says Retribution is what Sanity should have been on the main roster. Sanity at least got a good push to start with. They got a win over the New Day in a tables match. Before vanishing without a trace. Guinness Gamers says, I reckon they will do 3-man tag belts on their new show. Possible. He does clarify that it's AEW he's talking about immediately afterwards. I could definitely see that happening. But when it comes to this, they do have a lot of tag teams. I don't think they have that many 3-man tag teams to fill an entire roster. But I think it would be good to see more tag teams used because they do have a lot of tag teams and only one set of tag team belts. So they could certainly have a few people added, have 6-man titles and use them the same way that New Japan do, because that would be a good way to use a lot of those tag teams and a lot of the talent. It wouldn't be strictly on their new show, though. They would be both shows. Anthony says WWE trademarked the word Just Us. Maybe that was their original name. Possible, but they did plan to use Retribution from the off. But it has taken a while to make some graphics, which is interesting. Daniel Price says AEW needs to worry more about getting their stuff together and act like grown-ups before they introduce 6-man titles or any other title. As I say, AEW and WWE are both poking fun at each other. I don't think AEW is acting childish in this. I think they did at some point. Some of the choices they made were a little bit on the nose, but I don't think they're acting childish now. Anthony said it's scary how close Wobbly Walrus looks like Heyman. Well, that is the intention. That is the person they are parodying. And to my knowledge, Paul Heyman is quite fine with it because they did run it by him before doing so. Matt Hendricks says, even though Chris Jericho said that AEW doesn't take shots at WWE consistently, I'd say they kind of do. At least if you watch Being the Elite, there is quite a lot of shots taken at WWE. I would say on Being the Elite, they are funnier to me personally in my sense of humor because they're quite subtle. They're there. They're obviously there, but they're quite subtly played. It reminds me of when Matt Hardy and Hurricane were burying someone, and they just gave a big thumbs up to the camera because they made a joke about Triple H burying people. Daniel Price says good fun's fine, but when it's a constant thing, it gets silly. Jagged says maybe WWE doesn't give that much attention to the Japanese superstars, knowing that they don't have that much power on the Asian market outside of India and Middle Eastern. Possible, but you're not going to get that much attention in the Japanese and Asian markets without pushing Japanese superstars and Asian superstars. That's why we got the push for Jinder Mahal when we did. Newman Cole says Asuka did beat Charlotte Flair on an episode of Raw the night after Survivor Series. Also, Asuka's booking can't be perfect, and she's in a good place, not a perfect place, but a good place. She's in a much better place now than she was the last year or so. She is, and that is a good thing. They certainly are. She is the champion, so there is some belief in her. I just worry that she isn't getting the push that she could get, and she isn't being made to look particularly strong because she's not winning matches clean. I just want to see her start winning matches clean, and then I'll be happy. Anthony said, do you think AJ Styles has nightmares of Wobbly Walrus? No, I do not. As AJ Styles has himself said, it is water under the bridge with Paul Heyman now. Matt Hendricks says, would Alexa Bliss come out as the Fiend's manager? I guess for his matches, I guess. Possibly. I would like to see the Fiend's entrance with a fully goffed up Alexa Bliss in tow. That would be really interesting to me. I also worry about the fact that Bray Wyatt may decide one day to make a swinging lantern that is not his head, but Alexa Bliss's. I wouldn't like to see that, but I suspect one day we might. Michael Latina says, are there any plans of using Forgotten Sons again? I lucky enough to be the first to report this in a YouTube video, a review way back when, just after they vanished from TV, that they were pulled from TV essentially because nobody wants to work with them right now because of a certain tweet. There aren't any plans for them at the moment. They are on a period of creative hiatus. I suspect they are someone we will see move in the draft to try and give them a refresh and do something more with them. But if you'll forgive the pun, right now, they have been forgotten by WWE. Anthony says, I can't wait for Gallows and Anderson to show up in New Japan. I don't believe it'll be particularly long now before they do so. There are a lot of people who will be flying back for the G1, and there are a lot of people who will be flying back and will compete at G1 night, but will not be in the G1 tournament in tag matches there. So I think we may see Gallows and Anderson in that time, at least briefly, but right now Impact need them a lot more, and there is obviously a quarantine period for Japan. You can fly out there if you are registered with a working visa, but in order to get a working visa, you need to be able to fly out there. This, by the way, is quite telling for Jeff Cobb and his contract. He is wrestling in the G1. He has a working visa in Japan, and I feel this is an indication that he may have signed a contract with New Japan. Guinness Gamer says, I don't want to think about it, but who do you think is the man to take the title off of Drew? Hard to say, especially with so much changing going around. I'd like it to be Alistair Black personally, but there are a number of people it could be. It could be back to Brock. It could be that he changes brands and The Fiend takes the championship from Drew. It's really hard to say right now with the draft coming, although Daniel Price has said he believes it's going to be Orton. Matt Hendricks says, I do see Asuka retiring under WWE's banner. I believe so as well. I think she'll continue to wrestle for a while yet. She does have a lot to offer and has a lot of years to do it. She's a very fit, very capable worker who works in a way that doesn't seem to give her that many injuries. So I think she's got a lot left to offer. She'll have a few more contracts yet, but I personally think, yeah, she'll probably retire under WWE's banner. Anthony says, any idea who was under the mask the first night Retribution debuted? I'm not sure. I'd need to look back at this point. I can only say the most recent ones because they're fresh in my mind. Guinness Gamer says, who's your favorite tag team in WWE, and is it the same as your favorite tag team in the world? It is. My favorite tag team is The New Day, because try explaining The New Day to a non-wrestling fan. You cannot get it all in. They are so entertaining. Xavier Woods is probably one of my favorite wrestlers just of all time. He's such a strong talker, and I've learned so much about him just watching Up, Up, Down, Down, him as a person rather than him as a character on TV, that I just feel so much more connected with some of his game choices and things. And really, the respect that he holds backstage, the amount of people who love him and love working with him and love working around him, I do believe that if Xavier Woods is ever convinced to work somewhere other than WWE, it would make a serious impression and a serious impact on WWE talent, because a lot of people really like working with him enough that they may leave the company. Anthony says, how cool would it be to see Eric Young show up with the Impact title on Dynamite? It'd be cool, but there's no working arrangement there, so we're not going to see it. There is quite a lot of chat going on in the chat between people. I do very much encourage that. Please do keep doing that. But when it comes to questions, I will just pick questions out, so I won't respond to that much conversation that's going on between people. I'm sure you understand. Guinness Gamer says, any idea why WWE released AOP? Wanted them to come back to Seth's group. Looks to me like Seth is about to have no disciples. Yes, it looks to me like Seth is about to have no disciples. As I have reported previously, AOP were due back. Before SummerSlam, I was talking about them returning to feud with the Street Profits. My prediction of Street Profits beating Andrade and Garza at SummerSlam was based on the fact that AOP could be lining up straight away immediately afterwards. But while they were cleared and ready to go, to my knowledge, there was a setback. I can't say for certain that it was a new injury, but I was just told it was a setback, and someone in WWE gave up on them. Anthony said, should Tessa go to NXT? Is she the one to beat EO? I can't say Tessa is signed yet, so I can't say at the moment. I can't say she should be the one to beat EO because she may not be working for the company. Jagged says, I also think there are a lot of talent on WWE that are just happy being there, maybe not happy with booking, but just being a dream come true. I thought that with the newest Cesaro IG post. That is certainly true. That definitely is. A lot of people really like working with the WWE. I know this is controversial at the moment, but a lot of people really like working with WWE. Anthony says, any chance AEW goes hard after Kairi Sane? I don't believe so, no. Kairi Sane, to my knowledge, wants to return to Japan. She is her working contract expired when it comes to wrestling, but the intention is they have offered her a contract to work in NXT Japan. NXT Japan was due to have already launched. However, with the COVID and everything going on there, it's being pushed back and pushed back. Daniel says the only way WWE would sign Tessa is sticking to AEW since the dad's there. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. There are a lot of people in WWE who would very much like the company to sign the WWE. They would not be signing her to stick it to anyone. Matt Hendricks says, if WWE ever tried to sign Tetsuya Naito? It's really an interesting one when it comes to Japan and Japanese wrestlers in general. There is a process that the WWE goes through whereby they approach representatives quite often to say, how long is this person's contract and are they interested in coming to the WWE? If they're interested in that person, they would do that. They've approached representatives of Jay White. They've recently approached representatives of Evil about coming over and working in NXT. There is a number of people they've approached, but they do that pretty consistently, regardless of their level of interest, to see how long it is before someone's contract goes. It's why whenever Kenny Omega's contract would lapse, you would hear about interest from WWE and you'd hear about interest from everyone else. They knew it was happening. They would always reach out and there was always considerable interest. There is a number of people who they have approached in some capacity, and there is a number of people they've been told no interest. For example, when they approached Jay White's people, they were told he's here for 5 years and he is not interested in coming to WWE. Jacob Mendoza says, hi, welcome, Jacob. Anthony says, with Deonna Purrazzo a free agent, do you think AEW is her end game? To my knowledge, Deonna Purrazzo is not a free agent. She is signed to Impact and she is the Impact Women's Champion. So I don't think AEW is her end game. I think she's very happy in Impact at the moment. Jacob says, who do you think the next challenges for the Street Profits are? Hard to say, especially with so many things going on. But I think Rollins and Murphy, for me, should be in that championship run at the moment, or at least give them a match at Clash of Champions against them. But I think the Mysterios were supposed to be there, but didn't get the shot because Rey Mysterio tore his triceps, unfortunately. Matt says, seems like WWE is turning Murphy face. I agree. Buddy Murphy looks more face now than he ever has for me, particularly after a severe beatdown last week. Severe. Anthony says, I think WWE should merge the tag titles. It will benefit them. That is becoming more and more popular a theory. And I think really long term, that may be something they do. But with a draft coming up, there is too many teams on SmackDown that aren't being used. Move some of them over to Raw. We have full divisions on both sides. I think after the draft, if they still aren't really using their tag teams, And then after we have the New Day return to the tag scene, the Usos return to the tag scene, the Forgotten Sons, if they are ever to return to the tag scene, I think then they would start looking at whether or not to make some changes and maybe do that. Matt Hendricks says, speaking of NXT Japan, the wrestler Suri they signed, would they use her there or NXT? Not sure at the moment. Anthony says, since WWE has a lot of women, 2 women's titles makes sense, but 2 tag titles makes no sense. The WWE, the women's division that they've got with the 3 women's titles and the tag team titles, which goes across all, they believe that is more than enough for the women there. And to be honest, I kind of agree. Even though there are a lot of women not being used at the moment, I think if you put them into some tag teams, that'd be very helpful. Matt Hendricks says, I believe Deonna... Sorry, I missed you there because someone else jumped in. I think Deonna Purrazzo is a storyline free agent. I believe that to be the case as well. Jagged says, is Deonna really Sound of Impact because she's set to appear on Josh Barnett's Bloodsport, which I'm really looking forward to. Again, I believe she is under contract at the moment. I will do more research on that, but to my knowledge, she is under contract, and that does give her the right to appear in different places. Impact has always had working arrangements in that regard, but like I say, I will look that up to make sure I have not got bad information there. Jacob Mendoza says, I think that Hurt Business should compete for the tag titles. Possible. They have more than enough people, and that would move them out of their current small thing that they have. Matt says, I feel like they should all 3 brands tag divisions because NXT's division is stale. Well, it depends. If you do that, then a lot of tag teams just aren't going to get any attention. Ellie says, how do you think WWE will do cinematic matches once fans are back? I don't, to be completely honest. I think the WWE believe, and I've mentioned this when it comes to SummerSlam and the fact that they used Payback as an overflow pay-per-view and they weren't doing cinematic matches. To my knowledge, WWE have been looking at the stats and everything. They believe people have been getting quite bored of cinematic matches, particularly when it comes to the Swamp fight. That is something that they don't believe went down as well as it could have done, and they believe a large part of that is because people are just getting a bit sick of cinematic matches. Anthony says, according to Fightful, they've reported Deonna isn't working under a deal. So, yeah, could be. I'll look into that a bit more afterwards. Kevin Carpenter says, think Bayley versus Sasha happens at Hell in a Cell. I agree. Matt Hendricks says, Sue Young still does indies while being signed to Impact. That is correct. Quite a lot of people work in Impact and still do indie wrestling dates. Kylie Ray, I believe, is working in Impact at the moment, but is now a champion in Warrior Wrestling. So there's quite a lot of movement in that regard. That's always been the case. If it's been in an interview or something and she's said that she's working without a contract, I may have just missed it. Once again, as I've said, I don't really know everything, so it's nice to have you guys here filling in any blanks I may have. Guinness Gamer says, is there a chance they merged the titles at Clash of Champions, Street Profits and Cesaro and Nakamura? I think it's unlikely because they're doing the match now instead of at Clash of Champions, and I don't believe they'll keep it going until Clash of Champions. If they're going to merge the titles, I do think it'll be during the draft, if not after. Anthony says there were masked men that attacked the Warrior Wrestling show last night. One very tall, one very small. Really felt like Enzo and Cass. I will have to look into that because Warrior Wrestling are doing great stuff at the minute. I'm hearing a lot about them, and then they're getting a lot of big name matches and are really interesting feuds. So I'd like to follow up on that and watch a bit more. Enzo and Cass, we will see if they reappear anytime soon. I know they've reappeared sporadically at different shows. Could have been. Guinness Gamer says, early Royal Rumble winners pretty impossible to say because people may get hot, but I say Big E and Sasha. It is pretty much impossible. With everything going on, people could still get that big push. There are WrestleMania matches that aren't definitively planned yet. And in addition to that, there is a draft coming. Everything could change. Anthony says, I'd love to see NXT. Sorry, Matt says, I'd love to see NXT as part of Clash of Champions in the future. I would like to see that as well, but I think we then end up with like a 5-hour show. It's already looking like it might be too long as it is. Well, we are getting a discussion going on about cinematic matches. I'm going to leave you guys to that. Jagged says, nope, that's also about cinematic matches. Okay, so I'm not getting that many questions in at the moment. I'm glad you guys are getting that conversation going. By all means, enjoy. But I think ultimately that is it for the stream. We've had quite a lot of questions in. We are approaching 80 minutes. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. I hope to see everyone again soon. We have the Friday stream, we have the Sunday stream, and I'm obviously live on a lot of different platforms. But I do want to say a big thank you to everyone here who jumps in here, because the length of time that people choose to watch here has a big impact on me going forwards. if I'm going to make a living here, I need watch hours as well as subscribers. So I really am grateful for people who come here, stay here, and ask so many questions as well. I'm really familiar with so many names, and that really does warm my heart quite a lot. So thank you for coming. I'll answer a couple of last minute questions there, and please do remember to click like as well. So quickly, Matt says, with no takeover War Games this year, is NXT set to be part of Survivor Series again? Yes, I can confirm this year's Survivor Series will once again be Raw versus SmackDown versus NXT. Anthony says, what happened with the botched Enzo and Caster Ring of Honor thing? A very negative reaction from fans and a very negative reaction from New Japan. That is what happened with that. Guinness Gamers says, thanks, great stream as always. Thank you, Guinness Gamers. Thank you to everyone who has joined me. Please remember to click like. You can follow me on Twitter at Colohue, Colohue. And thank you, everybody who has watched. I will see you next week. And I hope everyone stays safe, stays healthy. Thank you for joining me.